A better man than me might start out this video talking about the things they like in Hades, like its soundtrack, character design, story, or voice acting. They might say how they've enjoyed Supergiant games in the past, maybe mention how they found the combat mechanics in Transistor to be really fun and engaging, or point out that they still have Spike and a Rail in regular playlist rotation on their phone. Depending on how fair they want it to be, they could even say something like, I may have just had a particularly bad experience with the game because of some of my personal hangups, and your experience might not even have any of the same problems. Anyways, time to shit on Hades for 15 minutes. I'm going to try my best not to spoil the specifics of the game, but I will be talking about its third zone in some details, so mild spoiler warnings. I can't beat the third zone's boss, or one of its two sub-bosses. Before you cry, Git Good, my actual grievance is not that the game is too hard or that these challenges are unfair. No, my main issue with Hades is the way it's structured, specifically when the spikes in difficulty occur and how that can create a feedback loop of frustration. Hades is a roguelite, which here means a game where you pick a loadout at the start of the game and then travel through a somewhat randomly generated set of rooms strung together in an overall similar structure. And if you die, you are reset back to square one, with the ability to unlock some permanent upgrades that make your subsequent runs easier, in theory. I don't have any problem getting through the first two zones of the game, and never really did after my first few runs of unlocking things. Each zone has a boss that is a significant spike in difficulty, but the first two zones were still well within my, albeit limited, ability. To get through these first two zones now takes me about 20-ish minutes. It's not a super fast pace, but one where I generally don't take too much damage and have a pretty easy time with what the game throws at me, all things considered. The problem starts to come up because I only sometimes have a build going by that point, which I feel can get me through the third zone. One which has significantly tougher enemies that all in some way mirror your abilities and respawn if you aren't careful. The zone is also a difficulty spike, but not an unmanageable one, and the enemies are generally within the theme of the zone, that being getting you to dig your heels in and really explore the combat mechanics, which make up the core of the game. The game then throws 1 to 2 mini-bosses at you, one of which I still don't have any idea how I'm supposed to mitigate its constantly spawning ads. By the time I've reached the boss of this zone, I'm lucky to have 1 extra life left in my stash of up to 3, even though I was able to waltz through the first 2 zones without really any health lost. The boss of the zone is, again spoilers, actually 2 bosses at the same time, and I can barely manage to kite one around enough to kill it without taking too much damage and dying, let alone start to get a handle on the second one. I have only ever managed to get past this part in the game twice, out of a total of 43 attempted runs. Clearly the answer is to get good, right? Just get good at that boss. Learn how to beat that boss, what its patterns are, how to dodge its attacks, what tells it has, when and how to go in for damage. I mentally understand that is what I should be doing. The only thing standing between me and actually doing that is, well, 30 to 40 minutes of gameplay. Each time I want to attempt fighting that boss that I absolutely have to go through. There is no other option. Play through the whole game fresh each time, maybe get a lucky broken build, more likely get something that's just okay, have a tough time in the third zone, and maybe die to a sub-boss that I only see half of the time instead of the zone boss that I'm guaranteed to get every time. In an hour-and-a-half play session, I might get 2 attempts. If I'm not too tilted after yet another loss, I might take a 3rd run at it, at which point I've been playing for over 2 hours and have made effectively 0 progress. You might begin to see why I find this frustrating. So, let's look at a few other contemporary examples and how they handle similar problems in different ways. First off, for the Git Good crowd, let's address the Ornstein and Smo in the room and talk about Soulsborne games and how they are built around bosses that are monumental progress blockers that usually have your respawn point within a quick jaunt away from them for ease of retry. Also, these games tend to have a much more tangible progression path, not being a roguelike where your character ostensibly resets each time. If a Soulsborne game were to attempt something like what Hades is asking, it'd send you back to the equivalent of Firelink Shrine each time you died, and make you kill every boss on the way back to whatever one you happen to be stuck on. So, for fairness' sake, let's say we want to stick within the roguelike light genre template. Well, let's look no further than 2 of my favorites, Risk of Rain and Binding of Isaac. In those games, only the final boss is the same each time, and every zone has a multitude of potential bosses you could end up fighting, meaning you aren't stopped dead in your tracks by the same obstacle every run. Those games also tend to be a lot shorter in their runtime, where you could get to the final boss in the same amount of time it usually takes me to get to that 3rd zone boss in Hades. These quicker turnaround times and greater variety of challenging bosses help to keep the games from becoming a tedious slog to get through. Lastly, Spelunky or Rogue Legacy have a structure where you can skip large parts of the game you've already cleared. In Spelunky, you can unlock shortcuts to later zones by running through the earlier zones enough times. And in Rogue Legacy, once you've killed a boss, it stays dead for subsequent runs, allowing you to ignore their particular zone. In practice, I don't much care for using these options, as it means I tend to be under-equipped if I skip over those areas of the game, but it is an alternative structure that lets you focus on an area you are having trouble with if that's what you want to do. Now, it is worth mentioning that Hades does have an option to make the game easier for you if you are finding it too difficult. The problem there is I feel that it is a poorly implemented system and doesn't actually address the core issues in play. In the main menu, you can toggle an option called God Mode that, when you first turn it on, will grant you a flat 20% damage reduction. If you die with it on, it will increase that damage reduction by 2%. In theory, this is a perfectly serviceable option for gradually making the game easier until the game's difficulty and your skill level meet at an equilibrium. In practice, however, it is a band-aid that can maybe carry you through the endgame while introducing a new problem in the form of grinding. To be clear, God Mode does not count any previous failed attempts towards that damage reduction bonus. On my account, where I have 43 deaths, well over 30 of them to that Zone 3 boss, I would still only have a 20% damage reduction. And if it turns out I'd need something more like 50% to get through that one boss, it would be more time efficient for me to just tank run after run on the first room in the game just to get that counter up. On top of that, what's the point of turning on that option to get me through the one fight I happen to be having trouble with just to see the end game? I'm already having an easy time with the first half of the game, and so this extra easy mode would probably end up having me being less engaged with that portion of my play. And if I'm finding it too difficult as is, What does the end game offer me but presumably more difficulty where I would need even more help to get through it? Far be it from me to just sit back and complain about a thing. I also have my own ideas on what could be done to fix it. Let's start with what is already there, the God mode option. Instead of just being a toggleable option in the menu, what if it was a slider that you could arbitrarily turn up or down to affect the damage reduction? You could even still include a toggleable option that would set it to the suggested level based on how many times you had died with it on, like it does now, or even an option to take into account the total failed runs on your account. I am a big, strong gamer who has beaten tough games such as Hollow Knight and Hollow Knight. But I also think including optional accessibility features helps let the good impaired enjoy games too. Menu options for augmenting damage given or received, even turning on invincibility or increasing invulnerability time while dodging or after taking damage, might add a little to development, but ultimately I think the game comes out better for it. What's that old adage attributed to Miyamoto? A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is bad forever. Well, allow me to add, and a game that is in early access can push back its release indefinitely to keep adding features. But those menu options still don't address my main problem, that being the 30 to 40 minute time sink of a run-up I need to do just to retry the one boss I'm having trouble beating. What if there was a way I could actually get multiple attempts at that boss, or practice it over and over again with different loadouts? What if it wasn't just that boss, but any room the game had thrown at me up to that point, or any room it could throw at me since it theoretically is randomly generating these rooms on the fly? What if there was some kind of, practice room accessible in the main hub of the game that could have all these options available? It might even be able to take into account how far into any given run a room is likely to appear, and either allow you to choose X number of upgrades or randomly assign the appropriate number to you. I acknowledge that implementing such a feature would probably introduce a lot more development time, as there would need to be art assets and a whole new menu system created as the framework for this theoretical practice room. There might even need to be some story justification, potentially a whole new subset of statistics, tracking what encounters you had seen to unlock what you could practice against. I can understand why this might add weeks or even months of work to the game, but this fully featured and robust option for practicing against any problem the game could throw at you would be the magic bullet that would shut down all of my complaints with the structure or difficulty of the game, and reduce the frustration of attempting to get good while putting the onus squarely on the player's shoulder. Ultimately, I think the simplest solution would be to give an option to retry the room you died in as many times as you like. If you still wanted to gate progress behind this challenge, you could make it so you couldn't continue past that room, but I'll leave that option open. The game already has a mid-run suspension save system, so it must already be tracking what your loadout is in every room, fixing the problem of what would your loadout be if you don't want to implement a new menu for setting that each attempt. This would mean you wouldn't get to choose what boss or room you'd get to practice against, but chances are if you were using this option, it'd be because you kept dying to the same thing over and over and over again, and wanted to retry that room. The development cost would literally be just adding a menu option or an interactable trigger in the hub area after you respawn that would let you load the last saved state the game had already been keeping track of. In the end, I expected more from Supergiant Games. They came out of the gate with a pretty polished experience in the form of Bastion, then proved they could keep up the formula with Transistor. They tried something more experimental narratively and structurally with Pyre, and here in Hades, they seem to be wanting to push that even further, for the first time having an early access development period, where they were able to take community feedback and improve the game collaboratively. If putting in any of the features I talked about here would have pushed back the 1.0 release of the game by a week or even a month, that would be more than worth it, as I would be here wholeheartedly recommending you pick it up and try it. Instead, as it stands, here I am, bad-mouthing Hades for 15 minutes because of an easily avoidable flaw in the design of the game's difficulty curve. Shame.